So if you don't know me, I am Addie Tapp. I'm our new Director of Young Adult Ministries, and I'm excited to be co-leading this class with Nancy Kennedy, who I think you guys know, but I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, Nancy.
I'm Nancy.
Hey. So we are a couple weeks into our series about the way of love, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a recap of kind of what the way of love is, what we've been doing, so that you have kind of the context for where we're going this week. So the way of love is kind of, if Bishop Curry, who's our presiding bishop for the Episcopal Church, talks a lot about the way of love and talks about following Jesus and kind of what it means to orient your life to Christ and to notice God in all ways and spaces. And this way of love that he talks about is really based off of a rule of life from Benedictine rule of life. And to give you a little bit of context for that, essentially, the Benedictine rule of life is just a way of ordering your life so that you notice God, and all different times and spaces and places, you're redirected back towards God. And there's kind of different categories for making you notice it, and there's lots of ways we could talk more about that. But essentially, this whole way of love and rule of life is all about bringing God more present into your life, noticing the way that God is already working through and in you, and just becoming more aware of the ways that God could be using you and the ways that you could be listening to God. So the way of love is broken down into a couple of different segments that kind of make that a more tangible idea, because that's a really broad goal for us to notice God and listen to God and discern God's call. And the way of love really breaks it down into helpful segments. So that's what we're walking through these couple of months, or this month and next month, for the way of love. So we've talked about turn and learn, our two ideas with this way of love. And this week we're talking about pray. And then the coming weeks we'll talk about, this is going to be me trying to recite it off the top of my head.
I've got it right here. Worship and bless on November 8th and go and rest on the 15th.
Thank you. So all of those are sort of broad categories of the ways that we could turn to God and notice God. And if you want to go back and catch up on turn and learn what we talked about last week and the week before, you could go to our YouTube channel on Faith Development for Christ Church and learn more about that. And this week we're going to talk about prayer and really what it means for prayer to be a consistent part of your life, what prayer really means to you, what prayer can be, and the ways that prayer is real and alive and can really be transformative for your relationship with God and the way that you notice God already working in the world. So Jesus teaches us to come before God with humble hearts, boldly offering our thanksgivings and our concerns to God, and then to listen for God's voice in the world and around us and in the people around us. So when we pray, we invite God's presence kind of into the moment wherever we are, whatever situation we find ourselves in. And so we're going to watch a really short clip of a video. You're welcome to watch more of it. We won't watch the whole thing, but I think it's really interesting, about a church that really focused on prayer and kind of what it meant for them in the midst of a really crazy crisis to double down and really make sure everyone had a chance to pray and the tools and the resources to pray. I will say before we watch this clip, this was filmed pre-COVID, and it sounds eerily similar to the situation that we find ourselves in. So I invite you to find some parallels to the way that we are living our lives now and see if you can find yourself in this story, because I would be very surprised if you did not. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to watch just about 4.5 minutes of this video, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about it. So let me make sure you can hear it. Okay.
I'm Chris Sickema, and for me, prayer is one of the harder practices in the way of love. It's always been difficult for me to find the perfect words, pick the perfect posture, know when exactly the prayer is over. Lucky for me, though, there's an expert who is willing to help me out. A priest and a community pillar whose prayer life took a good and unexpected turn a few years ago when she and her family moved to the Gulf Coast in Florida. Reverend Canon Katie Churchwell. We're going to talk today about prayer. And we thought you were the perfect person to talk to because prayer is so much a part of your professional life and your spiritual life. So we're here in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's absolutely gorgeous out here, but it's not always that way here.
No, back in 2017, St. Pete was going to get hit with a really big one. One of the ways that we do prepare for hurricanes is you shut down streets and you shut down buildings. And so the cathedral shut down. The cathedral is almost never shut down. The next thing you know, the doors are just locked and everyone is just holed up in their houses or they've evacuated. You are immediately stripped away from anything that brings you comfort. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
You're completely cut off from places like your church where you go to seek comfort when life is literally larger than anything you could possibly handle.
I can't imagine. So how did you, enterprising person that you are, come up with a way to counteract that isolation in the midst of that, absolutely terrifying situation for folks?
Hey everyone, happy pop-up prayer. I'm the Reverend Canon Katie Churchwell, your Facebook priest. It's good to be with you today.
We just started going live on Facebook. You see me sitting in exercise clothes of all things and in a dark bedroom because the power had already gone out.
Yeah.
And that was it.
What did you do on Facebook Live?
We did Compline and we did devotions in the morning.
So Compline is that last prayer service before falling asleep at night.
Exactly. It has beautiful prayers. It has incredibly comforting words. We found ourselves doing devotions, trying to create something dependable when everything else felt so incredibly chaotic. You have on Facebook in the comment section the ability to lay it all out there.
Sure.
We not only had people who were here in Florida, but you had people in Texas who were saying, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, people who had been through that before.
Through it. I mean, it was this beautiful coming together of community that you're never gonna get in a single church on a single Sunday morning. Sure. It just became this thing that while the doors were closed at the cathedral, you could find worship, you could find prayer, you could find community, and you could really find God's presence on Facebook. After the cathedral reopened, I thought we were done.
Sure.
And the next thing I knew, I had people sending me messages saying, hey, where did you go? I really liked that. Can it come back? And I thought, well, I have two kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. are the worst times to say, I definitely need to be doing something that's not related to my kids right now.
Yeah.
I realized I was gonna have to come up with something that could work for me as well as work for the people who were really seeking that type of connection and that type of outlet for their prayer life. And so pop-up prayer is a time in which I can pop up whenever I feel like it.
And the Spirit moves.
And the Spirit moves. And the content can be something from the Book of Common Prayer, from Compline to devotions for families and individuals, to noonday prayer, to reading a children's story. I'm trying to think of all of the things that you could see if you were to join me on pop-up prayer.
What kind of things am I going to see on
So
there?
you're going to see my kids.
Yeah.
They keep me on my toes.
Yeah.
When I say, would you like to pray? They'll say, okay. They'll also say, no, I don't want to pray.
Absolutely not.
Every now and again, I do a cooking lesson, which is, this is me trying to multitask a little bit. More than half of the things that I make are epic failures.
Sure.
You can't plan prayer to be perfect. Right. We can certainly be the best version of ourselves,
of
and God is going to show up with us.
Sure.
We can also be the worst, saddest, most pathetic version of ourselves, and God is going to be there too. Everyone's life brings an opportunity to go to God and say, either like, what's happening, to, oh my gosh, that was so amazing, to, this is so hard.
Because a lot of what prayer can be for folks is processing their daily life.
Exactly.
So I hope you saw some parallels to our current stage of life. So
I think they were prepared for the pandemic already. They just didn't know it.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to think, I don't know, I feel like we've been doing this for so long. It seems crazy we weren't ever doing this. And then also it somehow still seems new every day that we're in this weird time. It's a both and sort of time in our lives. So at the very beginning of that clip, Chris, who's, if you've been here for a couple of weeks, you'll see him kind of interviewing a bunch of people around the church. He talks about how a lot of times in prayer, he gets really concerned with getting it right and feeling like he has to know how everything's going to go before it happens. I know I often feel that way. Is that a common feeling shared with the group?
Absolutely. I just have to remind myself that he's going to listen, even if I don't do it right, whatever that is. So.
I know that there's a lot of people who probably their worst nightmare is getting called on in church to pray for the group.
The prayer have to be perfect. You know.
You don't worry about that, do you, Jim?
No,
Your prayers being perfect?
my attention span is way too short to have a organized long prayer. I'd love to be able to think about anything for more than about 20 seconds. That would be a big deal for me. So, yeah, my prayers are short and sweet, and I hope they work, but they're not going to be long and never will be. But
that's what the prayer book's for. When I taught Sunday school, I always did the prayers out of the prayer book because they're better than I could come up with myself.
Yeah, well, that helps. That helps.
I don't really worry about whether my prayer is perfect, but I will say that first time I met John's parents, Sally was a minister at St. James Episcopal Church, and I went with, I think I went with his whole family, like his brother and his parents and John, and John told me that John's dad, it was either his dad or maybe it was John, told me that like as the service began, they leaned over to me and said, "You do have a Bible, your favorite Bible verse prepared for you to stand up and tell in front of everybody." And I was like, "What?" No, I'm like what? And so, I mean, like the whole service, I was very nervous like the whole time. Yeah, I did not have to stand up. No, I was nervous then about whether I was going to get it right. I mean, like, but yeah, they were just joking.
Can't help it.
Oh, Addie, we can't hear you. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me
Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Nothing changed, and my computer just decided it was time. We love the joys of this COVID world that doesn't always work out the way we want it to. So as we think about something that I think is really interesting about this video was the priest who's leading this pop-up prayer kind of admits that it's not necessarily on a schedule and it's not necessarily the same every time. And it started out really great with this 8 o'clock in the morning prayer and 8 o'clock at night compline, and there was this rhythm. And then life got in the way and kids got in the way, and now it's just sort of as it happens. Does that sound like, that sounds like my prayer life in COVID.
I was thinking part of it.
Does that sound like y'all's too?
I think it's almost better that way because there's a reason it's happening right then. It's something that's come to you, or you know you need to stop, or it's not a required thing at 8 and 8. It's what's needed right that minute. So
I think one of my biggest learnings I've ever had in church, when I was still a layperson, I was going to Redeemer here in Greenville. And I was a Roman Catholic. I had not joined the Episcopal Church yet. So I was a Roman Catholic attending an Episcopal church. And it wasn't long after I had that kind of life after death experience. And I was really struggling kind of with prayer. Like I wanted to improve my prayer life. I guess I wanted to do prayer right. And coming from the Roman Catholic Church, just like in the Episcopal Church, everything's, you know, we have prayer books for everything, right? Like Roman Catholics have all types of prayer resources. And so you just open whatever and you pray it. It's all formulaic prayer. And I was feeling like I wanted more than that. And so I remember I went to go talk to the assistant rector at Redeemer, and she helped me to realize by a series of questions that prayer is something we actually do all day long, that our very breathing is prayer. And even part of Jewish thought is that the act of breathing in and out sounds like Yahweh. So every time you're breathing, you're actually praying God's name, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. And interestingly enough, our prayer book, when it asks about prayer in the prayer book, it talks about prayer as a response to God, what God is already doing. And so when I think about that in my everyday life, you know, everything I do pretty much is a response to something around us, right? And so that's all prayer. So how do I keep it centered in God? And that was like an earth-shattering reality when she was telling me that. Like, she talked about praying without ceasing. And so how is our whole life a prayer? Every word, every action, every breath. I haven't achieved that yet. But it's my goal. Like, I just think how amazing would that be if that's what my prayer life was like. Like, I'd never have to worry necessarily about getting it right, but staying centered in it, right?
Well, that's good. I feel like I pray, and this is we're human, we're fallible, and I feel like I pray when I'm worried about something the most, and when I need when I feel like I need God. I mean, I feel like I need Him the most. Then, like yesterday, I was driving this U-Haul on mountainous roads,
Oh,
and I was really scared. I was really, because I am not a good driver, and I was really, really scared. And I think I was in, Kelly, I do think I was in constant prayer then, but that was mainly because I was really, really nervous, and yeah, and so yeah, that it felt like, I mean, to pray comforted me because I was really nervous. I made it though. I made it. It's all good.
Well, so that brings up an interesting. Oh, can you hear me? But that brings up an interesting thing for us to think about as we think about. So we're talking about the rule of life, and we're talking about kind of ways to hold ourselves accountable and to really put into words, and maybe even write down and put somewhere that you're going to see it, kind of how you want to order your life and what you are going to hold yourself accountable to do and be going forward. And so maybe, Snow, yeah, it's a great example of when you feel nervous, instead of just holding on that nervousness and deciding that you can fix it, or if you can control it, it will go away, to notice those times of anxiety or notice those times of stress and to turn to prayer. What are some other times?
I'm still remembering what Kelly told us week before last about when you wake up in the middle of the night, that's God's time. And it's what I put into that was, it's not the time to sit there and think about everything my family needs to be doing. And so, I just, that's like a revelation. I think that's a great thought. So
That's another response to God, right? You wake up in the middle of the night. Okay, God, what do you want out of this time, right?
Right,
Like, how do
yeah.
I pray for all those things going through my head
yeah.
and put them in God's care?
I think we're often like, is it Samuel as a child when God calls out to him and it takes him 3 or 4 times to notice it? I think I'm often Samuel, where I think God will call me and then I'll run to the next room and be like, oh, someone else needed me. It definitely wasn't God. It was certainly the tasks of my daily life that were calling to me. But it's a good reminder to pray. to, when you think you hear something, to actually listen.
Harrison and I were just having this conversation a couple of weeks ago because I had this realization in my own formal prayer time that I am very quick to say no to things. Like, so somebody will put an opportunity in front of me and I'll say no. That's what I did to Harrison when he called me and said, I'm interested in you coming to Christ Church. I said, no, I'm going to hang up the phone on you. I did that in regards to going to the diocesan house. I said no. I did that in regards to the call to the priesthood. I said no first. I am not quick to be like Samuel and say, here I am, Lord, right? Like, I doubt it. Like, I'm like, why did that come to me? That's not of God. That's, ego or something else. And so I'm quick to push it aside instead of like really hold it in prayer.
Yeah, but that's really good. I have a problem. I cannot say no. I've actually, like, it's a good form of relaxation to like say no to things, and then there in the story of Martha and Mary, and one of them, I get confused. Is it Martha?
Yeah, Mary sits at the feet of Jesus and Martha's busy preparing like dinner and everything.
Okay, I'm Martha. I'm Martha.
I'm actually a Martha too, Snow. I'm with you.
But Martha, if people come to her and say things and ask her to do things, then she really just can't say no. I mean, yeah. So that's bravo. You're good. I mean, yeah, but it's each to his own, because it's each to his own and everything is relevant. I mean, yeah. And that's where God, I guess, can help us on whichever one that we need, right?
Yeah, finding that balance, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, because I started this by saying how many things my kids were doing, right? Yeah. I can't say that.
You did start that way. That is true. Well, and I do think, like, if we're really praying and God is responding to that prayer, what it does is center us, right? In some way. So we're a more centered person. We're not always yes, we're not always no. We're more centered, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of prayer in many ways is that you could be doing all sorts of things wrong and you can pray and God will show up, or you could be doing all the things right and you can pray and God will show up. So even if you said no to a bunch of things and then you kind of take stock of it and think, oh no, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or if you've overcommitted yourself and you're stretched thin and driving to 45 places in one day, you can still say, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I can still call on God and he'll show up.
And I would even flip that, Eddie. Maybe God's already showed up and our prayer gets us in tune that God's there.
Yeah, I think of how many times in my life I'll pray for something and kind of halfway through praying and asking for something, God, can you change this? Can you do this? Can you show up in this way for me? And kind of halfway through the prayer, I'll think, oh, so that's silly. God is already here. I just completely missed it. And I think those are the moments that God has a little bit of a concerned look on his face at me, like, come on, what took you so long to get there?
I had the notes in advance and I actually prepared today. So one of the things was to read these two verses, and I have them pulled up, and this really spoke to me. It's Romans 8:26 and 27. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words. And he who searches the hearts of men knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. That made me think about when, like, I've had a really hard time, and people say, oh, I'm praying for you. I used to think, like, a long time ago, well, what does that even mean? But there have been times when I was so sad I could not come up with one myself. And when someone tells you they're praying for you, you can kind of feel that that's happening. and so it's sort of this, that's not exactly what that's talking about, but it's what made me think about it. And so I just really like that we had that verse as part of our lesson today.
I may have mentioned this before. Ruth Haley Barton, she's written some really good books. And one of the books, I can't remember which one, I think maybe it's The Soul of Your Leadership or something like that. She talks about prayer as just holding a name, right? And so if I'm praying about a circumstance or I'm praying about a person, or I just hold the name and hold it in silence, letting, just as you read, Nancy, the Spirit intercede and cry out for that person and what the Spirit knows that they need. And I thought that's pretty earth-shattering. It's interesting to me. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear if anybody else has had an experience like this. When I started doing that, sometimes I hear things that surprise me. And so I always have to like check with the person and kind of check it out. Like, I have a friend who's opening a home for boys who have been sexually trafficked. And first of all, his name came to me just out of the blue. We had not talked in 3 years. And I was praying one day and his name came to me. And so I texted him and I was like, your name just came to me. Should I be praying for something special for you? And he said, oh, I'm just trying to make some decisions about commitments and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll hold that up in prayer. Well, ended up that was like the beginning stage of this whole trying to figure out this ministry. And so his name came to me again, you know, after some time. And I'm like, I'm just checking back into you. I'm wondering if it's still the same thing. And he said, let me tell you more about like what's going on. And when he told me, I was like, I'm definitely holding that in prayer for you. And he goes, could I come up? Because he lives in the Midlands. Could I come up and us just have some prayer time together? And I'm like, absolutely. So he did a few weeks ago. He came up to my house, was telling me about everything that was going on in the scenario. And then afterwards we prayed about it. And as we were praying about it, this lady's name kept coming in my head, and he had not mentioned this lady's name. And so I just started praying for it, that whatever it had to do with this lady, that God would work that out. And when I finished praying, he said, why did you say, and he said this lady's name? And I'm like, because it just kept coming in my head. And he said, I've been having dreams about her. She's my friend from elementary school.
Oh,
and so like we talked about it. And so now he's going to try to find her because he thinks somehow maybe she's connected with this whole thing God is doing. Has anybody like ever had that happen? Like somebody pops in your head, you check on them and it ends up they really did like need prayer at that time about something?
Maybe I haven't been as good to act on it like you did. So maybe it was there and you know.
I would have never thought about it if I hadn't read this and Ruth, whatever her name is, in Ruth's book, Haley Barton. If I had not read that book, I don't think I ever would have prayed that way, but it's really made a huge difference.
well, and it is, I think it is funny how you think how people's names will pop into your head and you're like, why am I thinking about that person? Like I can think back to a time when the kids were in elementary school and this classmate of, gosh, whose classmate? I guess it was Craig's classmate, kept popping into my head. And so we met, the child and I met over the summer and just kind of had lunch and did some things together. And turns out I found out from him that he was going to be moving schools because his mom was moving. And then I went to, and it was just, that would have been a really bad thing for that child to move from the school because he was progressing so well at Stone Academy. And went to the principal and went to this guy who was one of his leaders, and they worked with him over the summer, and he ended up staying at the school that he was at. And I don't know, I was just like, why did I get involved with that? You know, why was that in my mind? Why is he always in my thoughts? And just the changes that you can make by acting on that, you know.
Responding to God.
Yeah. And then like I was just telling Nancy in a text, like, you know, my dad had just passed away recently, and I was having thoughts about, just being without a parent now. And we were out for a walk, walking the dog, and I'm having these thoughts to myself about not having a parent anymore. And then I get home, get the mail, and Nancy's note is in my mailbox about how she knows what a struggle it is to have both parents gone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how did that happen that way? And I don't know. It's just important, I think, to act on things like that. That, she actually took the time to write me a note, and there I was struggling with it. And there was her letter.
Prayer is action. That's awesome.
Thank you for sharing that, Betsy. Well, I think it's a good reminder for us, and maybe a challenge we can set for ourselves in the coming weeks, and as we move into this new season of the church year, and as we kind of get into these times of holidays and traditions and kind of reimagining what COVID looks like with Thanksgiving and things like that, we can really notice God. And I think that what the stories we've heard today, long day already, the stories we've heard today are reminders that God uses us and God is present in our lives and wants to continue to work through us. And it's just that small act of saying yes or noticing, or maybe saying no, or maybe saying yes, and slowing down and taking the time to notice God and to do things like pray for that person, send that text, write that note. So that's what I'm going to do. And kind of this challenge I'm going to set for myself is to really listen, to be a better discerner of God.
I join you in that, Addie. I'm always trying to do that too.
Well, and I think too, like Nancy's Bible reading was saying, every prayer that I say, I always, I have my own thoughts and I have my own prayer and desire or what in my prayer. And then I always think just God's will be done, just let God's will be done. And I always say that because you're not in control. You're not, leading the show. So it's like, I always try and just, hand it over to God and say, God's will be done.
It's like the Garth Brooks song, Thank God for Unanswered Prayers.
Yeah. Go ahead. What?
Yeah, you were talking about the kind of having.
I muted you accidentally.
Somebody was talking about having kind of be constantly thinking about prayer and making that more centered in your life. I was just thinking about, hey everybody, this horrible movie we watched yesterday, that The Social Dilemma. If you hadn't seen it, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Makes me want to, well, I've turned off all that crap anyway, so I don't know how to get in touch with the church anymore, but that's another story. So I have to start going because I turned them on. Whatever little bit of social media I had is gone. Not in it. So this is it. But no, but it was talking about the algorithms that they promote, whatever it is. They know what you want to think about. They know what before you know you want to think about it. They have figured you out, and they know what's going to get your attention, right? If you've seen the movie, that's so. It just got me thinking about that with what you're describing. It's like you got to program yourself. You got to create your own algorithm that puts God into that scroll, so that the first thing that comes up in your whatever they call that list of junk that comes up on a Facebook, whatever, it's more God oriented. And I think most people aren't that way. Most people in the world aren't that way. Maybe that way Christians or in South Carolina, but most people just aren't. That's not part of their algorithm. It's not in there. It's never been programmed because they never went there. They never had an experience that said, oh, wow, this person is interested in God or prayer, we're going to keep reminding him of that. That's going to keep coming up in his feed so that we keep thinking this person's actually interested in God or getting them interested in God. And it just got me thinking about how there's so many people out there who it's just not part of their feed. My ADD kicked in. I was thumbing through National Geographic right there, and the title of this article is about the pandemic is Trust in Science. And science will get you through, and science is the answer, and science this and science that. And they weren't trying to say it, my God, but it was very much, there are a lot of people who think that way, who God is not part of it. There's a scientific answer, there's a mathematical answer, or it's just something's going to happen. We got to think about how to make that more people's algorithm. We got to figure out how to get that into their daily thought, so that becomes a quick, how do I respond to this situation? How do I make my life better? How do I deal with my kids, my family? Beyond the folks at Christ Church, and how do you reach those people? So anyway, just food for thought.
We do have in our feed every morning the prayer that's been coming in for the 20th anniversary from the church. And maybe you haven't cut out your emails yet, Jim. Hopefully you're still getting those from the church. But mine comes, so we get that daily prayer. It's a little verse in the prayer that the different church members have written. And mine comes to my work email. So when I open it up every morning, I go to that one first. I think if nothing else, I'm going to start today with that. And this is a nice way to say, okay.
I love those. I wish we'd keep doing those all the time.
I agree.
We are. Liv Ann's already worked on them for 2021.
Good. They have just been the best thing. And some days it's uncanny how
appropriate they are.
Yes.
I mean, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, I was on Instagram, and I think I follow like 3 individuals, LSU football and Christ Church, and I mean that's it. And about every 2 weeks I'll look at it, and after I watched that movie, I just turned it off too. Bad. But what I was gonna say though, I did like on the Instagram feed, because I wouldn't follow anything else. I would touch it, it would constantly come up, and it was good. I caught some stuff at some appropriate times, just sitting there on my phone that was, again, it knew that was something I was interested in, and it let me know. So I'm anti all that stuff, but it does work. I mean, we just got to figure out a good balance for it.
For everybody.
And like you said, if it's better for you for email or some other way. But there are a lot of people who don't like it. I think there are a lot more young people who don't need to be on it or need to figure out how to deal with it better. And I think that's something we need to be real cognizant of as society develops and we start going more and more digital about what else is interfering in that digital interface that's taking me away from where it should
just
be.
The personalization of life. Yeah. With people, one-on-one with people. Yeah.
Right.
I get this image as you were talking, Jim, I think about how many times like our family will be talking at dinner and something come up and we're like, oh, let's Google that, right? Like, let's find the answer to that. Let's Google it. I'm sitting here thinking, oh, more in our life, we just need to Google God, right? Like that's what you're talking about. Set our mind frame.
Yeah.
But Google won't allow it. Yeah.
Starts with G-O. I mean, yeah, it could be. We try that. Yeah.
Halfway there. Well, thank you guys for this conversation. This has been, I think, a good reminder for all of us, and it's been uplifting for me. I can speak for myself in that. I know that Kelly needs to go to church, so we'll let her free. Before we do, Kelly, would you like to close us in prayer today?
I will. The Lord be with you.
No, so with you.
Let us pray. God, be in my head and in my understanding. God, be in my eyes and in my looking. God, be in my mouth and in my speaking. God be in my heart and in my thinking. God be at my end and at my departing. Amen.
Amen.